Have you ever met someone and felt like they've been part of your life long before you ever spoke? Not in the obvious, surface-level way, but in the quiet familiarity that sinks into your skin without explanation. You don't know their story, yet something about their presence feels like home. No effort, no tension, just ease. And maybe, for a moment, you wonder, is this coincidence? Or is something deeper at work? We're used to explaining these moments away. Serendipity, good timing, chemistry. But sometimes those words fall short, because what happens when someone doesn't just enter your life, they mirror it. Not the polished version you show the world, but the parts you've hidden, the parts still healing, still searching. Could it be that some people cross our paths not to stay, but to reflect? Carl Jung spoke of synchronicity, those meaningful encounters that align with something within us, whether we realize it or not. So maybe it's not about who they are, but about who you are when they arrive. What part of you is ready to be seen? Not every connection is meant to last, but each one can teach us something if we're willing to listen. So in this video, we'll explore why certain people feel meant for us, how our unconscious mind draws them in, and what it takes to truly recognize real connection, not just in others, but within ourselves. When the outside reflects the inside, have you ever wondered why certain people show up at specific points in your life, not just in passing, but in a way that feels too timed, to align to be a coincidence? Maybe they weren't what you expected. Maybe they even challenged you, but something about their arrival felt like it belonged. What if those meetings aren't about chance at all, but about reflection? Carl Jung believed the people we meet often mirror something within us. Not always the parts we're proud of, either. Sometimes it's the parts we've buried, the hurt, the unfinished stories, the pieces we try to hide until someone walks in and unintentionally brings them to the surface. Have you ever noticed that? It's not always pretty. Some of the most meaningful connections don't come with comfort. They come with friction. They shake us, not because they're wrong for us, but because they hold a mirror to a part of ourselves we've tried not to see. So when someone triggers you, does that always mean they're bad for you? Or could they be showing you where you're still tender? I remember meeting someone during a season when I was trying hard to keep everything together. They weren't the softest person, not even the easiest to talk to, but something about them poked at the armor I had spent years building. It wasn't a romantic thing. It wasn't even a deep friendship, but it was real and uncomfortable and strangely important. Looking back, they weren't there to save me, they were there to reflect what I hadn't healed. So when we say a connection feels meaningful, could it be because it's aligned with where we are emotionally, even if we're not fully aware of it yet? What if your unconscious mind, the part of you that holds every story you've ever lived, knows exactly what you need to face? And what if it pulls people into your orbit not for completion, but for confrontation, to help you see what's been living quietly inside you for too long? It's a strange thought that the people who upset your balance might be part of your growth. But doesn't growth often start in discomfort? The question isn't always why did they come into my life, but what did their presence bring out in me? Did they stir old fears? Did they awaken a lost part of you? Or did they simply show you a version of yourself you hadn't met yet? Not every connection is meant to stay, but maybe they all mean something. Maybe the deeper work isn't about figuring them out, but about listening to what your reaction to them is trying to say. Because when your outside world keeps echoing the same themes, it might be time to stop looking out and start listening in. And when patterns repeat, maybe they aren't accidents. Maybe they're reflections of something within, asking to be seen. The patterns we keep repeating. Have you ever found yourself in the same kind of relationship over and over, just with different names, different faces? The details shift, but the feeling stays. Maybe it's the loneliness that creeps in even when you're not alone, or the subtle ache of trying to be chosen by someone who never really sees you. And at some point, don't you start to wonder, why does this keep happening? It's easy to think it's just bad luck, that maybe you're picking the wrong people. But what if it's not about the people at all? What if it's about the part of you that's still waiting for a wound to be understood, and keeps walking into situations that look like the original pain? Carl Jung believed that what we don't bring into consciousness will return again and again as fate. So maybe these patterns aren't punishments. Maybe they're invitations. Maybe they're your inner world speaking in the only language it knows: repetition. Think back. Was there a time you felt invisible, like your voice didn't matter? And now, do you find yourself drawn to people who listen just enough to keep you hoping, but not enough to make you feel safe? Is that a coincidence? Or is your unconscious trying to rewrite the old script to finally win the love you didn't get back then? But here's the thing, the unconscious doesn't care about comfort. It cares about healing. That's why these patterns feel familiar, even when they hurt. Because your psyche isn't trying to hurt you, it's trying to finish the story. It's asking, are you ready to see what this is really about? I once found myself in a relationship that felt like déjà vu. The way they pulled away when I got close. The way I stayed longer than I should have, thinking I could earn something deeper. It wasn't until it ended, not suddenly, but quietly, that I realized I'd lived this before. And not just with them. So the real question became, what part of me keeps calling this in? That's not an easy thing to ask. It means looking beyond the surface. It means accepting that the pain might not be about this person, but about an old belief still running in the background. One that says, love has to be earned, or I am too much to be held. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's when the cycle starts to shift, not because the world changes, but because you do. You stop mistaking familiarity for love. You stop confusing pain with depth. And maybe, just maybe, you start choosing something different. Not because it's louder or more exciting, but because it feels honest, quiet, safe, whole. So how do we stop repeating and start choosing? Maybe it begins with becoming someone who no longer overlooks what's real. Becoming before belonging. It's strange how often we search for the right person without ever asking if we're ready to meet them. Not ready in the sense of timing, but in wholeness. Are we looking for someone to love? Or are we hoping someone will come along and make us feel like we finally matter? Carl Jung believed that the journey toward authentic connection begins within, not outside. When we are fragmented, we tend to attract what reflects that fragmentation. It's not punishment, it's resonance. And sometimes the people we feel the strongest pull toward are simply mirroring what we haven't yet resolved in ourselves. Have you noticed how relationships shift when your self-worth shifts? How the same dynamics that once felt magnetic start to feel draining? It's not because they changed, it's because you did. And maybe that's where the real work happens, not in chasing love, but in learning to become someone who doesn't need to chase it at all. So what does it mean to become whole? Not perfect, not invulnerable, just honest. Someone who doesn't confuse intensity with connection. Someone who knows that love shouldn't require shrinking. Someone who has stopped asking to be chosen because they've already chosen themselves. But how do you know if you're still chasing from lack? Look at the questions you ask in love. Are they rooted in fear or clarity? Do you wonder, do they want me? More than you ask, do I feel safe with them? Do I feel like myself around them? That shift in focus from external validation to internal truth might change everything. I remember a time when I kept ending up with people who made me feel small, not because they were cruel, but because I hadn't yet figured out how to be fully seen without flinching. I was showing up with the hope that someone else's love would fix what I hadn't learned to hold. It never worked, but it taught me something I couldn't unlearn. Until you know who you are, love becomes performance. You try to be enough, say the right thing, be the easy one. But real connection doesn't require performance. It invites presence, and presence only happens when you're not afraid of your own reflection. So before asking why haven't I found the right person, maybe the deeper question is, am I the version of myself that would even recognize them if they were standing in front of me? Because the more grounded you are in your truth, the less you'll tolerate what unsettles it. And that's not loneliness, that's alignment. That's the space where love begins to feel less like a search and more like a meeting place. Quiet, unforced, real. But even as we grow, we must ask, is what we're feeling truly about them or about a part of us we're still chasing? Is it them or a reflection of you? Sometimes we feel pulled towards someone with such intensity that it stops us in our tracks. They light something up in us, maybe awe, maybe longing, maybe both. But what if that spark isn't really about who they are? What if it's about what we're projecting onto them? Carl Jung talked about projection not as something we do on purpose, but as something that happens when we're unaware. We unconsciously assign parts of ourselves, often the ones we've buried or disowned, onto others. So when you're drawn to someone's confidence, could it be because you've forgotten your own? When you admire their boldness, their passion, their ease, is it possible you're seeing qualities you once had but no longer trust? And when the connection starts to shift, when the person no longer fits the story you built around them, do you feel like they've changed? Or do you realize you never really saw them clearly to begin with? It's hard to tell the difference sometimes, especially when the emotions are loud and the chemistry is strong. But intensity isn't always intimacy, and longing isn't always love. Sometimes it's the ache of wanting to become someone you've been afraid to be. Have you ever created a version of someone in your mind and then felt betrayed when they didn't live up to it? Not because they lied, but because they were never meant to carry the weight of your hope. It's not shameful, it's human. We want to feel whole. We want to recognize ourselves in another. But what if the recognition we're looking for has to start with us? Jung believed that when we reclaim the parts of ourselves we've projected, we begin to see people more clearly, not as saviors, not as symbols, just as they are. And from that place, real connection becomes possible because it's no longer built on illusion. So the next time someone captivates you, what if you asked, what part of me am I seeing in them? What have I given away without realizing it? It doesn't mean the person isn't special. It doesn't mean the connection isn't real. But maybe the deeper truth is that you're meeting a part of yourself through them. And maybe the disappointment that follows isn't because they fell short, but because the mirror cracked, and now you're being invited to look within. Is that terrifying? Sometimes. But it's also freeing, because the moment you stop searching for pieces of yourself in other people, you start calling those pieces back home. And once they're home, you won't need to project light onto anyone else. You'll simply recognize it because it's already yours. And if we quiet the noise of projection, what remains is often the whisper of intuition, soft but true. When your body knows first. Have you ever stayed in something that felt wrong, but you couldn't explain why? Maybe it looked right on paper. Maybe everyone around you thought it made sense, but there was a weight in your chest you couldn't ignore. A quiet resistance in your body, like your nervous system was bracing for something you couldn't name. Have you ever paused long enough to ask where that feeling was coming from? Carl Jung believed that the unconscious speaks in sensations before it ever reaches words. Not every truth is loud. Sometimes it whispers through your breath, your gut, your skin. And in a culture that teaches us to rationalize everything to make it make sense, how often do we silence the knowing that doesn't come with proof? You might tell yourself you're just being desensitive. That discomfort is part of growth. That no relationship is perfect. But is it discomfort, or is it your intuition waving a quiet flag, hoping you'll slow down long enough to listen? There's a difference between fear and intuition, though they can feel similar. Fear is noisy. It spins stories. It reacts. But intuition, it's steady, soft, like standing still in a crowded room and suddenly knowing which way to walk. Have you ever felt that clarity? The kind that doesn't shout, but settles in your bones? Sometimes we're so used to chaos, we mistake calm for boredom. If you've spent years in high-stress dynamics, walking on eggshells, anticipating the next shift in tone, peace can feel unfamiliar, almost suspicious. You might ask yourself, why isn't my heart racing? Why don't I feel the usual intensity? But is that absence of anxiety actually what safety feels like? I once stayed in a relationship long after my body had started telling me to leave. There wasn't a dramatic reason, no betrayal, just a slow erosion of trust, not in the other person, but in myself. I kept ignoring the pit in my stomach, the way I tensed up when they walked into the room. I thought I was being too emotional, but what if those emotions were signals? What if my body had seen something I wasn't ready to accept? Looking back, the hardest part wasn't leaving, it was realizing how far I had drifted from my own voice. Not the loud voice of self-judgment, the quiet one, the one I used to trust before I learned to doubt it. So ask yourself, when something feels off, do you slow down enough to notice? Or do you rush to justify it? And when someone feels right, not because they excite you, but because they calm you, can you receive that without suspicion? Maybe the question isn't whether the other person is good for you. Maybe it's whether your body feels safe enough to rest when they're near. Because once we start listening to what feels steady, we begin to realize peace isn't boring. It's just unfamiliar. When love isn't a war zone, how many of us have been taught that love has to be earned? That it's a battle, a back and forth, a test of who can hold on longer. We mistake the highs and lows for passion, the anxiety for intensity. And when we feel calm, we wonder if something's missing. But is it? Carl Jung believed that chaos is not connection, that real growth comes not from clinging to struggle, but from becoming conscious of why we're drawn to it in the first place. So what are we chasing when we run toward emotional storms? Is it love or is it validation? Are we trying to be seen or trying to prove we're worthy of being kept? Think about the relationships that left you breathless, the kind where your stomach dropped with every silence, where you felt alive but never at peace. Was that love? Or was it your nervous system on high alert, trying to manage someone else's unpredictability? Did you feel loved or just needed? And can you tell the difference? There's a version of love we learn early on that confuses attention with affection. One that teaches us love is something we must earn, maintain, defend. But what if love, the kind that lasts, isn't built on survival mode? What if it's not the fight that proves it's real, but the absence of one? I once believed love had to be hard, that it meant giving more than I had, that walking away was weakness, and staying through pain was strength. But over time, I started to ask better questions. What if the real strength is in walking away from what doesn't feel safe? What if loyalty isn't measured by how long you endure, but by how honest you're willing to be with yourself? Have you ever been with someone who made you feel like you had to shrink just to keep the peace? Did you convince yourself that the roller coaster was worth it because the highs were so good? But why should love come with whiplash? Maybe we keep returning to chaos because it feels familiar. But is familiar the same as right? Or is it just what we've known? Real love, the kind that steadies you, won't ask you to abandon yourself. It won't feel like a performance. It won't leave you constantly chasing clarity. It'll feel like breathing without effort, like coming home after years of being lost inside someone else's storm. So ask yourself, gently, are you in love? Or are you trying to win love? Are you being held, or are you holding on? And if peace feels strange, could that mean you're finally healing? Could it mean you're learning that love doesn't have to hurt to be real? And sometimes, the most loving thing we can do is release the story we hoped for to make space for what's true. The cost of holding on. How many times have you said you wanted peace, but found yourself holding on to chaos anyway? Not because it felt good, but because it felt familiar, because the silence of letting go was scarier than the noise of staying. We tell ourselves it's love. We call it loyalty. But is it really either, if it keeps costing us parts of ourselves? Carl Jung believed that we cannot grow in barren soil, that until we face the unconscious patterns driving us, we'll keep planting seeds where nothing can bloom. So why do we stay in relationships that never shift, hoping they'll somehow change if we just love harder? Maybe it's not about the person we're holding on to. Maybe it's about an old belief still echoing inside us that we are more worthy if we suffer, that love means proving ourselves, that walking away is giving up, even when everything in us is quietly breaking. But what if staying isn't strength? What if it's avoidance in disguise? I once held on to someone who made me feel like I had to earn every good moment. I kept explaining away the hurt. I romanticized the little crumbs of care they gave when I was at my lowest. And deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. But I stayed, because letting go felt like failure. Because I thought if I just tried harder, it would finally be different. Looking back, I wasn't staying for them. I was staying for the version of me who still thought pain was a price worth paying for love. So what are you really holding on to? Is it the person or the hope? Is it the relationship or the fear of starting over? Are you staying because it's right, or because the idea of being wrong feels unbearable? Letting go isn't about forgetting. It's not erasing the memories or pretending it didn't matter. It's about choosing yourself when someone else won't. It's about listening to the part of you that's been whispering, "This isn't love. This is survival." And if it feels hard, it's because your heart was in it. Of course it hurts. Of course it's messy. But maybe the real question is, what's the cost of staying another year, another season, in something that continues to take more than it gives? Growth isn't always graceful. Sometimes, it looks like releasing your grip on something you once begged to hold. Sometimes, it's grieving the future you imagined with someone who was never meant to go there with you. And when you finally let go, not out of anger, but out of clarity, something opens. Not immediately, not loudly, but over time. And in that space, something new can take root. Not because you chased it harder, but because you stopped settling for what kept you stuck. Because when the right connection comes, it won't ask you to dim, it will feel like coming home to your own light. The quiet truth of real connection. Have you ever met someone and, without needing to explain yourself, you just felt seen? No convincing, no chasing, no need to shrink or stretch into someone you're not. They didn't try to fix you, impress you, or pull you into a performance. They just stood there, and somehow, you felt like yourself. What do you call that? Luck, timing, or something deeper? We often think real connection should be electric, fast, intense. But what if it's actually quiet? What if, instead of a spark, it feels like an exhale? Like you've been holding your breath for years, and suddenly, without realizing it, you can finally breathe again. Could that be the sign you've been overlooking? Carl Jung believed that when we are aligned with who we truly are, we begin to attract from that place. So maybe the moment someone sees you without expectation, it's because you've finally started seeing yourself. Maybe that's why their presence feels so grounding. Not because they complete you, but because you're no longer performing for love. How often have you mistaken tension for depth, or confusion for chemistry? There's a certain kind of calm that feels foreign when you've grown used to emotional noise. But does love need to be dramatic to be meaningful? Or have we just been conditioned to think that peace is boring? I remember someone once told me, love shouldn't feel like a test you're always one wrong answer away from failing. That stayed with me. Because I've lived those tests, the walking on eggshells, the second guessing, the trying to decode silence like it held some hidden meaning. And yet, when love finally arrived, without all the noise, it felt strange, almost suspicious. Could something so still be real? Maybe the real question isn't, is this person right for me? But am I being true to myself in their presence? Because the right person won't require you to abandon yourself. They won't be a puzzle you're constantly trying to solve. You won't need to search for clarity, it'll be there, quietly, like a lamp that doesn't flicker, like a song without static. So ask yourself, do I feel safe, or do I feel like I'm always trying to be enough? Do I feel inspired, or am I just relieved when things aren't falling apart? Not every connection will be loud. Not every love story starts with fireworks. Some begin with stillness, with steady eyes across a crowded room, with a conversation that leaves you feeling more like yourself, not less. And maybe that's the clearest sign of all, not how much someone excites you, but how much closer you feel to your own truth when they're near. Isn't that what we're really looking for? Not someone to fix us, but someone who makes it easier to stay home within ourselves. And maybe the truest sign that you're ready is that you no longer chase what doesn't match your becoming. The frequency of becoming. There's a quiet shift that happens when you begin choosing yourself, not in the loud, performative way the world sometimes expects, but in the soft decision to stop abandoning your own truth. You stop chasing what's unsteady. You stop clinging to people who feel like confusion, not because you stopped caring, but because something in you started remembering who you are. Carl Jung believed that when we face our shadows and integrate what we've hidden, we begin to resonate at a different frequency. And like tuning a radio, that shift changes what we receive, not because the world outside us suddenly transforms, but because we're no longer attuned to what once held us hostage. Have you ever noticed that? The people you once couldn't let go of suddenly feel distant, not with bitterness, just no longer magnetic. The conversations that once felt familiar now feel forced. The rooms you used to twist yourself to fit into start to feel too small. Is that growth? Or is that your soul making space for something new? We're taught to chase connection, to look outward, to fill the silence. But what if the connection you're longing for can only come when you stop chasing and start becoming? What if the right people don't appear because you seek harder, but because you've stopped pretending? I remember a time when I thought finding the right person was about effort, about strategy, about fixing myself just enough to be lovable. But the moment I started honoring my boundaries, speaking from truth instead of fear, something changed. The wrong people started slipping away on their own. I didn't have to push them out. They just no longer matched where I was headed. So how do you know when you're finally aligned? It's not about perfection. It's about peace. It's when your life starts feeling less like a performance and more like a mirror. Not reflecting what you want others to see, but reflecting who you really are. It's when connection doesn't feel like a test anymore. When someone new enters your life and you don't feel the urge to prove anything. You're just there, present, open, whole. And when that person arrives not to complete you, but to meet you, will you be able to recognize them? Or will you be so used to the noise of unhealed patterns that the stillness feels unfamiliar? So maybe the real work isn't about finding the right person. Maybe it's about becoming someone who no longer overlooks them. Someone who doesn't mistake peace for boredom. Someone who knows that when love comes, it won't demand performance, it'll invite presence. And when that happens, it won't feel like magic. It'll feel like coming home, not to someone else, but to yourself. Because when you return to yourself, the love that meets you there will never ask you to leave again. Coming home to yourself. Maybe the people who come into our lives aren't here to complete us. Maybe they're here to remind us of what's been waiting inside us all along. The calm, the truth, the pieces we disowned to survive. Some connections stay, some don't. But each one can bring us closer to the parts of ourselves we're ready to meet again. So what if the most important relationship isn't the one you build with someone else, but the one you repair within? What if the goal isn't to find the right person, but to become the version of you that no longer overlooks what's real or accepts what isn't? Carl Jung believed healing starts by facing what we've hidden, not to fix ourselves, but to become whole. And wholeness doesn't mean having it all figured out. It means showing up as you are with softness, with honesty, with presence. Isn't that what we're all really searching for? The next time you feel drawn to someone, ask, is this clarity or craving, alignment or projection? And more importantly, am I showing up from a place of self-trust or from fear that I won't be chosen? Because when you choose yourself first, the world responds differently. You no longer chase, you no longer settle. You begin to attract connections that don't ask you to perform, only to be. And maybe that's what real love feels like. Not fireworks, not the high, just a quiet returning, a steady recognition, a sense of finally coming home, not to someone else, but to you.